Hi there, and welcome to tonight's webinar. I'm Annemarie. I'm going to take you through our topic tonight, which is food for thought, nutrition, and your brain. So for those of you who I haven't met yet, I'm Annemarie. Welcome. I am a holistic nutritionist. I have a degree in medical science, and I'm also a certified yoga instructor. So between those three qualifications, I think I have kind of an interesting viewpoint when it comes to different aspects of health and wellness. And I'm excited to talk to you about brain health tonight. If you have seen me do a talk before, maybe we chatted about gut health, stress, nutrition. Those are the topics that I really like to touch on. And lo and behold, they are a part of tonight's presentation too. What's really interesting is the intimate connection between gut health, brain health, stress and brain health, and everything else. And we'll get into all of that as we go on. But welcome. So tonight we're going to answer two main questions. The first one being, how does food influence brain health? And the second one being, how can we use food as a tool to support brain health? And when I'm thinking about brain health, I'm thinking about three specific aspects. I'm thinking about day-to-day cognition and performance. I'm thinking about mood, depression, anxiety, that type of thing. And I'm thinking about protection against cognitive decline and aging. And the great thing is that everything we'll talk about tonight, all aspects of supporting the brain, ticks all three of these boxes. So anything that we're doing to support brain health is helping with our day-to-day cognition and performance, helping with our mood, helping with protection against those long-term chronic disease states. So we'll talk about the connection between food and brain health. We'll look at processes that affect brain health that are mitigated by some food interventions. And we'll talk about how to get started now on supporting those aspects of brain health. So you're in the right place if you want to feel your best, perform your best, and just be your best self from day to day, moment to moment, waking up in the morning, feeling your best and being able to show up as your best self. All of those aspects come into play when it comes to brain health, when it comes to nutritional intervention, and that's what we're going to dive into here. Okay, so let's start off by looking at how food influences the brain. So there's three main sections here that I've broken down when it comes to how food is actually having a physical effect on the brain. Number one being fuel. Of course, food is our fuel, and we'll look at the specific fuel that your brain is craving. Second of all, oxidative repair, which we'll definitely dive more into, but looking at how food influences those oxidative processes and supports the brain in those repairs that just come from day-to-day functioning and use. And third, food counters inflammaging, which is a new term that I just learned, and I really like it. Basically, how food counters inflammation in the body. And this term is just indicating how inflammation really is underlying so many of our chronic diseases and contributing to the process of aging. So how can food kind of counteract that inflammation in the body and lead to better health in the present moment and in the future? So first off, fuel. Food is fuel for our bodies, for our brains, and the brain is a very hungry organ. So it only is about 2% of our body mass, but it uses about 20%. So a fifth of the calories that we're taking in are going to fuel the brain. Not only that, though, it requires the right fuel to be able to run efficiently. So it's not just, oh, great, I'm eating a high calorie diet. You know, I'm eating McDonald's for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I'm getting tons of calories in. Great, my brain's going to be happy. It requires the right type of fuel to run efficiently, and the wrong fuel leaves the brain kind of starved and depleted of these vital nutrients. And that's where we run into issues when it comes to our mood, when it comes to degenerative brain diseases, and all sorts of things down the line. So supporting the brain with good food, good fuel is so important. And one of the ways I really like to think about this and really think about health overall is to start to think back to our ancestors. It's really only been the last 150 years that we've had this huge overhaul of what it looks like to live as a human day to day. It was only 100 to 150 years ago when lighting, indoor lighting, electricity became commonplace. So that was a huge difference for us. We were no longer interacting with the regular sleep wake cycles that we get from being in tune with the rise and set of the sun. Um, and other places where it's dramatically influenced us as humans is for sure when it comes to our food and our food supply. So many aspects of food and eating, right? All of a sudden, we have these packaged foods that contain all these additives and artificial ingredients and different flavorings, preservatives, even the fact that our food is now packaged in plastic, which is a source of some toxic contamination at times. Even when you look at the agricultural aspect of our food, when it comes to GMO farming, conventional farming, where we're growing to feed the masses. So we're not turning the soils over properly. We're not making sure that they are rejuvenated with the nitrogen and nutrients that they need to be able to grow plants that actually are giving us the nutrition that we need. So it's really interesting to think back to, okay, over hundreds of thousands of years, we evolved as humans. And an integral part of that evolution was the evolution of this big old brain that we have. We actually have a dramatically large brain for our body size. And it's that brain and all of its intricate folds and everything that's come along with this evolution of this brain that's allowed us to be human. It's allowed us to have these higher thought processes, to process and understand emotions, to be able to connect with one another on a different level. So thinking about how these brains evolved, what our ancestors were doing to fuel our bodies that allowed for that evolution, that allowed for that growth of those brains, is really integral to understanding what does our brain actually want and need to be fueled. And beyond the brain, what do our bodies want and need to be fueled on a day-to-day basis? If we look back at our hunter-gatherer ancestors, where there was a lot of evolution going on when it came to our brains, they were eating things like grasses, seeds, roots, bulbs, tubers, fruits, and occasionally some wild-caught meat, but more often than meat, it was fish, a lot of fish. And this is interesting. This is a primarily plant-based diet with a lot of fish. So really good source of fats and good fuel for the brain. And this is interesting to look at because this looks like a lot like what we know now as kind of a Mediterranean diet, higher in fats, focus on fish versus red meat, and primarily plant-based. And the Mediterranean diet has actually been really well studied. And this is an image from one of those studies here. So this is a brain scan where two females were compared in this brain scan that were matched for, things like age, socioeconomic upbringing. All aspects were pretty much matched side by side, with the main difference being that the woman on the left was raised and continued to eat a Mediterranean diet, whereas the woman on the right followed more of a Western diet, also known as the SAD diet, the standard American diet. And we'll look at what that looks like in a minute. But what you can see from these brain scans is that there's big differences in the way the brain is presenting here, with the main takeaway being that there's atrophy or shrinkage in the brain of this woman that has been following the Western standard American diet. So this shrinkage, if you take a close look, it might not be completely obvious, but this shrinkage you can kind of see here. This is indicating neuronal loss. It's showing signs of accelerated aging, and it's showing that this woman is at a risk of dementia. So this is showing in a big way the influence that the diet is having on the brain. And we're going to get into the mechanisms behind this as we go on, but I just wanted to show this early on to really nail home the point that this isn't, something that we just think might be connected in some way, or, oh yeah, that kind of makes sense. This is something that we know very well and is very well documented in the scientific literature, that food is one of the main things that we can take a look at, as well as some other lifestyle factors in there that has an influence on brain health and our likelihood of developing things like dementia, Alzheimer's down the line, and as well as an impact on mood, anxiety, depression, things that are so rampant in our society. So let's start off by looking at things that the brain does not want. So not only are these things not fueling the brain, they are actually contributing to processes that actively damage the brain, or withholding nutrients that would protect the brain. So what's listed out here are kind of a lot of components of the standard American diet. So refined carbohydrates, junk food, fried foods, sugar-laden beverages, processed meats, trans fats, all of these things that you can just really easily find on the grocery store shelf. If you're walking down those middle aisles, you can easily pick these things up. They're really quick and easy to stop into your fast food joint if you need something quick and easy. They're not things that come with a warning label on them. So, they're just on the shelf. You assume that they're okay. We kind of know, okay, maybe these aren't the best things for us, but we'll talk a little bit about how these are actively contributing to brain health and maybe lack of it. So the first thing that all of these things have in common is that they're high in calories, but they're very low in nutritional value, and they're low in antioxidants, which we'll talk about in a little bit why that is so important. But another aspect here is that it's high sugar. A lot of packaged foods are high in sugar, even when we don't think they are. Things like salad dressings, something you're going to pour on your salad, all of a sudden that's adding a ton of refined sugar to your diet. Sugar is kind of hidden everywhere, and it's a bit of an epidemic. And Alzheimer's is actually often called type 3 diabetes because of how intimately connected it is with blood sugar levels and dysregulation of our blood sugar levels. You might be able to recall a time when you had a bit of a drop in blood sugar, and we call it hangry, when you immediately feel this intense need to eat. You might feel shaky. And another one of the telltale symptoms is brain fog, not being able to think straight, kind of hitting that midday, maybe low, where you're like, oh my gosh, I just need to eat something now. I can't think straight, feeling really angry and frustrated. And that is because the brain is being starved of the glucose that it needs to be able to function properly. So low blood sugar is a dangerous place to be. And low blood sugar is often caused by a dysregulation in blood sugar levels, where you eat something that is a refined carbohydrate, so something that, for example, something on this list here. And when you eat it, your blood sugar levels spike. So you eat a refined carbohydrate, and what a refined carbohydrate is a carbohydrate where the fiber has been removed. So let's think about white rice versus brown rice. The literal difference is that in white rice, the fiber has been removed, and that's what you're left with is white rice. In brown rice, that fiber is intact. When you remove that fiber, your body is able to really quickly break down and absorb that sugar. So your blood sugar level goes really high up, and high blood sugar is very dangerous. Sugar in the blood is very reactive. So your body panics a little and it goes, oh my gosh, we need to get the sugar out of this blood. And so you secrete a bunch of insulin. Insulin tells your cells, okay, let's uptake this sugar really quickly. There's too much in the blood. But when you're in this dysregulated state, your body pumps out too much insulin, just needs to get that sugar out of the bloodstream. You absorb too much sugar from the bloodstream, and that's when you get that blood sugar low, that drop, that hypoglycemia, that hangry state. So that's one way in which these high sugar foods, low fiber foods are contributing to the spike and crash in blood sugar levels, and ultimately leading to your brain not having enough sugar in that moment, and down the line causing issues If you're constantly going through that cycle of spike, crash, and your body's constantly pumping out a lot of insulin, then your cells start to kind of ignore the insulin. They become insulin resistant. They go, oh, more insulin. Okay, we've seen enough insulin. And they don't have the same response or that same uptake. It's almost like the boy who cried wolf, where, the first time they go, oh my gosh, there's too much blood sugar. And they uptake the blood sugar, but the more and more and more they're exposed to the insulin, the less responsive they become. And that's when you get into things like diabetes and other metabolic syndrome type things. And when you get into that high insulin state, you're also triggering a lot of inflammation in the body. And inflammation is something we're going to talk about a lot tonight. So that's the first thing really when we look at this list, is thinking about sugar and the way that's affecting your body and how that's affecting your brain. The other thing here is that it is very nutrient deficient. So lots of calories, but very low when it comes to vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients, antioxidants, these things that your body really needs to build up and maintain good health. So your body is getting this cue, oh yeah, we've eaten enough calories, it's really good, we've gotten all the calories we needed for the day. But when it's actually going through the digestive process, it's not being fueled with the nutrients that it needs. And this is where it begins to affect mood, emotion, cognition, because the brain requires a lot of nutrients, a lot of energy to be able to function properly. And it also needs neurotransmitters. And these neurotransmitters like serotonin, dopamine, these things that really contribute to mood are built from the building blocks of things like folate, B vitamins, vitamin C, vitamin E, your trace minerals, all of these things that are found in good quantities in whole foods, but are completely lacking when it comes to these processed foods. So that's the other place where the SAD diet influences brain health and mood and cognition, is that you're literally not getting the building blocks that you need to be able to build these neurotransmitters in order to process your emotions in order to be able to cue these things properly in your brain. So let's dive into some neuroprotective nutrients. So where are we getting these neuroprotective nutrients from? We're getting them from our good vegetables, our fruits, our whole grains, our good quality fats, our good quality proteins. And this is where we go back to basics, thinking about our ancestors, thinking about what they were eating, and thinking about how our bodies have evolved over time until the last little blip of 100 years to be fueled. So naturally, when we start assaulting our bodies with all of these sugar-laden, fried foods, junk foods, all of these things that our body does not recognize, of course it's going to be tripped up. Of course it's going to cause inflammation and cause down the line these chronic diseases. These are the things that your body recognizes, and it's known for the last 100,000 years, maybe not these exact foods, but as it's been evolving, it's known these nutrients in an intimate way and knows how to work with them, knows how to digest them, absorb them, and build these into the things that your body needs. So I put a quote at the top here that I altered a little bit from Michael Pollan: "Eat whole foods, not too much, mostly plants." I just added whole in there. These are the things, like we said, that your body recognizes and needs to be able to function properly. An interesting piece too when it comes to brain health is this idea of when to eat. So intermittent fasting is something that I work on with a lot of my clients. And what we do, and there's a bunch of different ways to do it, but the way that we do it is on a daily basis, having an 8-hour eating window. So that looks different for different people. Sometimes there's 3 meals involved, sometimes there's 2 meals, but it's really having a structured 8-hour eating window, specific times that you eat, not eating outside those times. And this is just allowing the body to be able to do the processes it needs to do between eating. Digesting takes a lot of energy. And so being able to give the body a break between those eating periods allows the body to do the things it needs to do when it comes to clearing up after digestion, allowing, all these processes to go on that contribute to just cellular repair and energy production and all these other things that it can do without having to worry about digestion constantly. And this comes back to the idea of how are our ancestors eating? How are our bodies evolved to eat? And when you eat this way, when you participate in something like intermittent fasting, it's been shown to lower insulin levels, which initiates burning fat for fuel. And your brain loves to use these these lipids that are produced in this fat burning process. It's a really good food for your brain, and it increases cellular repair as well as neuroplasticity, which we'll talk about in a minute. The next piece here is oxidative repair. So the brain is a very vulnerable organ. It's capable of being damaged simply from day-to-day functioning. So oxidative stress occurs as a natural byproduct of energy production, and this is true in every cell in your body. In the process of producing energy, we create free radicals, which are damaging little guys. And the antidote to that is that we create internally antioxidants, and we also get a ton of antioxidants from our diet that help to offset this oxidative stress. It's particularly important in the brain, though, because it's a vulnerable organ. Damage here can be catastrophic when it accumulates. Other organs, it can be, a little bit more resilient, but the brain is a very vulnerable organ. So taking care of oxidative stress within the brain is a big piece where food comes into play. Having food that are antioxidants and providing that antioxidant antidote to the oxidative stress is really, really important. And it helps to offset the damage and maintain that optimal brain health. So neuroprotective nutrients here. These are the things that we're getting out of our foods that, and this is not an exhaustive list, but a good little starter pack here. These are the things that are going to offset that antioxidant or that oxidant damage and provide good brain health. So taking a look at the first one, polyphenols. These are guys that we get out of our fruits or vegetables, nuts, beans, cocoa powder, dark chocolates. These guys have been shown to reduce rates of Alzheimer's, depression, dementia, and really help to support brain health. Vitamin C, vitamin E, DHA, all of these nutrients are really important when it comes to supporting that oxidant state and in providing the antioxidant solution to that. One interesting thing I wanted to talk about here too when it comes to antioxidants is just up until a few decades ago, scientists thought that we were born with all of the neurons that we would ever have. So our brains were set when it came to neuronal capacity, and that's all we had. But what we're realizing now, and there's been lots of research coming out around neuroplasticity, neurogenesis, the ability for the brain to build new neurons and to create new and different connections between existing neurons. And this is a really cool place to look into. And it's something that I think is inherently, it just makes sense, right? The brain is constantly changing. You are constantly growing and changing. And as you're exposed to different life events, different stressors, different things that are pushing your development, of course, we are having this neuroplasticity. These neurons are growing and changing and switching and creating new neural pathways. And this can actually be very much so supported by food. One of the things that really is beneficial here is this compound called brain-derived neurotropic factor, or BDNF. And levels of BDNF rise with intakes of these polyphenols, of these antioxidants, as well as our omega-3 fatty acids. And so the result here, you eat your good antioxidants, you will be supporting that brain-derived neurotropic factor, and you're experiencing less brain fog, faster mental processing time, more plasticity. So beyond just supporting and making sure that your brain is supported in that oxidant status, it's also providing the nutrients that you need to be able to create new neurons and have that plasticity and grow and adapt and think in the moment and process and have that mental clarity. So this is another thing that we talked about in the SAD diet, standard American diet. We're missing a lot of these antioxidant compounds. So if you're living on the SAD diet, your brain isn't being supported in these ways. You are producing less BDNF and less able to have that neuroplasticity. Okay. So the third thing here on how food influences the brain is that foods counter inflammaging, which is that new term I just learned that describes the influence of chronic inflammation in the body on the aging process in the body, and how high inflammation levels really drive aging and underlie so many of our chronic diseases that we know these days. And of all the threats that the brain can face, chronic inflammation is the most disruptive and destructive. And this happens in a few ways. Inflammation interrupts neurotransmitter production. It impacts the ability of the neurons to actually communicate with one another. And it's correlated with brain volume shrinkage, like we saw in that MRI scan. And the key piece here is that inflammation begins in the gut and can be addressed by diet and food choices. So let's talk about leaky gut and inflammation. So normally the cells that line your intestinal lining are held super close together, and they form this really nice protective barrier between the inside of your gut, which is exposed to the outside world, right? Food that's going in through your mouth is being exposed to different pathogens, different toxins, different things that you're taking in. And that cell layer is keeping that nice separation between that outside environment and then the bloodstream beneath. But what happens is that through many different causes that we'll go through in a minute, there can be damage to that cell layer and it can start to loosen. And all of a sudden, you get these gaps and these holes. So this piece here is showing these cells that are nicely held tight together. This is the inside of the intestinal lumen here. And this is showing what happens, when there's inflammation, these cells are no longer held close together. And when that happens, things from that intestinal lumen start to move through into the bloodstream where they are not supposed to be. And those things include things like undigested food particles. It could also be pathogens from the outside world, toxins. But what happens when those things move into the bloodstream is that the immune system sees them and goes, oh my gosh, what the heck is this? This is a foreign invader. We need to launch a full-on immune response attack and get rid of this thing because it might be dangerous. And in that immune response, your body's secreting all these cytokines and all these inflammatory compounds because that's part of what the immune response does. It uses inflammation to kill off and remove harmful things. So now a couple of things happen. When you have that leaky gut and particles like this are continuously passing through, your immune system is on high alert. It's contributing to a lot of inflammation in the body. And it's also starting to recognize self sometimes. Sometimes that's where autoimmune diseases come from. Might start to recognize your thyroid. That would show up as Hashimoto's. Might start to recognize your joint cartilage, rheumatoid arthritis. And anytime there's inflammation in the gut and there's inflammation kind of flowing throughout the body, there's going to be inflammation in the brain as well. And when it comes to brain health, this means that the blood-brain barrier could be compromised. This barrier that protects the brain, somewhat like this barrier is protecting the inside of the blood. There's a barrier around the brain that is very protective, only lets certain nutrients through. It's kind of like a bodyguard that is watching every single item that's coming to the blood-brain barrier and only allowing certain things to pass. Inflammation can cause that brain barrier to become leaky. And it can also contribute to all the things we just talked about when it comes to neuronal ability to communicate and the ability to create neurotransmitters. And the key is that this is happening because of this inflammation, and this leaky gut is what's causing the systemic inflammation. So what is contributing to leaky gut? This list is a big list here, and it's not even an exhaustive list, but acid blocking medication, alcohol consumption, antibiotic use, environmental toxins. You guys can read it, but the two I want to highlight here that are contributing to leaky gut are stress and elevated cortisol levels, and reactive foods, foods that are entering the body and causing inflammation. Let's start by looking at inflammatory foods. So there are foods that we know that when we eat them are more inflammatory and contribute towards inflammation in the body. Two of the biggest ones are gluten and dairy. When it comes to gluten, there's a whole range of sensitivities. You know, there's people who are celiac and they react to gluten in an autoimmune way. There's people who are non-celiac, gluten sensitivity, and most of the population kind of fall within that. And there's a couple of ways that gluten is affecting our gut health and causing this inflammation. One is that gluten peptides aren't broken down properly. They're not digested properly in our digestive tract. And so by the time they get to that cellular membrane, they should be broken down into these small recognizable pieces, but they're not. And that triggers an immune response, and that then contributes to that inflammatory response, and down the line, chronic inflammation. The other sneaky thing that gluten does is that it actually binds to receptors on intestinal cells and causes a release of zonulin. And zonulin is a protein that mediates that connection of cells to keep them nice and tight together. When there's a lot of zonulin, it starts to loosen those cells. So gluten in a big way is contributing to that leaky gut and that inflammation, that then chronic inflammation. Dairy is another one, and there's several ways that this is contributing to inflammation. The first way is just a general lactose intolerance. So a lot of people don't actually secrete enough lactase enzyme to be able to properly break down lactose, which is the sugar in milk. Another one is that it increases mucus production within the body. Dairy also triggers an insulin release, which we already talked about. High insulin means high inflammation. It increases inflammation in the body. And another interesting one is that there's a high concentration of environmental pollutants. So this idea of bioaccumulation, where the grasses and the feed that the animals are taking in contain higher amounts of sprayed chemicals and environmental runoff, and that becomes concentrated in the animal's milk. So there's a bioaccumulation effect there that's increasing the environmental pollutions and the toxicity that the animal is encountering, and really magnifying it and being secreted with the fats in the milk. So that can also be very damaging and irritable to the intestinal lining, causing more inflammation. So listed here are a few more common inflammatory foods, things that we know contribute to inflammation. I'm not going to go into the why behind all of them, but these are things that we know are contributing to that inflammation in the body, and then down the line, contributing to inflammation in the brain. And like we said, number one worst thing for the brain is chronic inflammation. So the takeaway there is that if we want to, and we'll talk about this in a minute too, but if we want to mitigate that inflammation in the body, we need to start with the gut, start with lowering the inflammation there, taking a look at these particular foods that are known to be inflammatory. And what we do is we work with something called an elimination protocol, where we eliminate strategically these higher inflammatory foods while also bolstering up really healthful foods, really getting in that fiber that we talked about from those good veggies and fruit and whole grains. And then we go through a systemic reintroduction of these foods to see what foods might be affecting your specific body. And it varies from person to person, but even taking them all out, giving the body a break, just reducing that inflammation, allowing that gut lining to regain its integrity, really reducing that systemic inflammation can do amazing things. And I've seen people have incredible results just going through this elimination process. And then having really enlightening things come up when we go through reintroduction and realizing, oh my gosh, this one thing was triggering so many of my issues, or this combination of things was really underlying these so many issues when it comes to pain, migraines, mood, um, you name it, so many different aspects of health. Because this inflammation is beginning in the gut, if we can nip it at the source, just good things come from it. So that's how we work with these common inflammatory foods. The next thing I wanted to talk about when it comes to stress, when it comes to inflammation in the body, is stress. And there's a couple of ways that chronic stress is affecting the brain. One that I wanted to mention first is that chronic stress activates an area in the brain called the amygdala. This is where we take on fear. And when that area is being activated and being our primary place of activation, it takes away from our ability to kind of connect to all these other, problem solving, communication, emotional detection places of our brain. So when we're chronically stressed, we're literally stealing the ability for our brain to function in other ways and function properly. The other point here is that when we're in fight or flight, when we're in this chronic stress state, digestion and absorption is inhibited. When we're in fight or flight, we shut down all of our non-essential systems, including digestion, immunity. And so when you're eating, when you're chronically stressed, you're not secreting enough stomach acid, you're not secreting your digestive enzymes, those things are inhibited. And so this can contribute down the line to inflammation because you have undigested food particles moving through the system. It can contribute to a bacterial overgrowth of bad bacteria because those food particles that aren't being broken down and digested properly, that's what they will eat. If you don't eat it, they will. And all of these things contribute further to leaky gut and inflammation. So stress is a big piece to look at from a nutritional perspective. You could be eating the best diet in the world for your brain. You could be eating like the perfect, Mediterranean diet. But if you're stressed and you're not breaking those foods down and you're not absorbing it properly, if the nutrients aren't getting into your body, then it's not having the effect that we want it to have. And it's not going to be giving that nutrition and that value to your brain. So stress is so important when it comes to mealtime and when it comes to just your day-to-day life. And that's not to say that you need to push away every single thing in your life that is stressful, because life comes with stress. That is just part of our day-to-day lives. But what is really important is being able to have the resiliency in your body to be able to shift from that fight or flight, that stressful state, into your rest and digest state, where digestion takes place, where cellular repair takes place, and all of these really good things. That's something we'll talk about in a minute too. So supporting brain health. We went through, how is food influencing the brain? We talked a little bit about how to support brain health, but now let's dive into the nitty-gritty of it. So first point, fuel your body right. Second thing we'll go through, identifying and removing those food triggers that are underlying that chronic inflammation. And 3, address stress. So first of all, fuel your body right. That nice little quote again, eat whole foods, not too much, mostly plants. Aim for a high fiber diet, like we said before. So that's lots of your fruits and vegetables. Half a plate of vegetables at each meal is a great takeaway, quick implementation from this. We already talked about these details here, but just to reiterate again that fiber is really going to hold on to the sugars from your meals. It's going to feed your good gut bacteria. And one thing we didn't mention too is just that fiber is what's going to hold on to any toxins that your body is detoxing and pushing out, and make it pass through your body rather than sit there and be reabsorbed. So that fiber is such a key integral piece when it comes to long-term health and avoiding chronic disease. incorporating good high quality daily fats, getting good quality protein, following intermittent fasting, those good points that we talked about already. Next is identifying and removing food triggers. So those inflammatory foods that we talked about, when you're able to identify and remove food triggers, you're able to reduce that systemic inflammation, which supports cognition, mood by lowering the inflammatory state of the brain. It also modulates the immune system and relieves digestive symptoms. So if you're someone who's constantly suffering from things like gas, bloating, discomfort, cramping, really not feeling good or comfortable after meals, then this is a really important place to take a look at those food triggers and removing them. And like I mentioned about the elimination diet, that's how we generally work with this from a functional nutrition perspective, is going through a specific protocol where we remove these inflammatory foods, bolster up these other foods that we know are really going to support the body, and then go through the reintroduction process of then testing, okay, what is causing your body to react? And then addressing stress. So like we just talked about, stress impacts digestion. And if you're not digesting your food properly, then you're not getting the benefits from all the good food that you're eating. So the first place to start looking at stress is around mealtime and using some mindful eating techniques. Things like simply sitting down to eat, first of all, which kind of sounds funny, but in our day-to-day busy lives, whether you're at work or whether you have kids and you're with your kids, or sometimes it's a matter of just, I'm just going to eat a little bit here, and that'll just stave off my hunger for a little bit. So first piece when it comes to mindful eating is just taking a seat, sitting down with your food and your meal, and then taking 3 deep breaths. Our breath is one of the only things that we can control that actually signals to our nervous system where we're at. So, if you were face to face with a tiger and you're moving into that full on fight or flight mode, your body is automatically going to shorten and shallow your breath, almost like a hyperventilative breath. And just in our day-to-day lives, it's kind of how a lot of us breathe, up in our chests, not really getting that deep, deep breath. So being able to take a nice deep breath is signaling to your body from the outside in, hey, there's obviously not a tiger in front of me. It's all good. It's cool. I'm safe. We can kind of shift into that rest and digest state. Then when it comes to eating mindfully, eating without distractions. So not finishing up your emails while you're at work, not watching a TV show, really sitting with your food. The sight and the smell of food are the first things that actually trigger your body into secreting stomach acid and getting these digestive processes going. Then when you take your bite, chewing your food really well. One of the most important things you can do to actually extract those nutrients from your food is chewing it really well. 40 chews is what they say is like the ideal. So I challenge you to try 40 chews just to feel like what that feels like when it comes to how far your food has been broken down. And then just work with it. You don't need to get too obsessed with the 40 chews. That can be overwhelming, thinking about it every time, 40 chews, but just really being aware of how much you're chewing, and really your food should be a fine paste before you swallow it. And then, that's around the mindful eating experience. So being present, that's my challenge to you, is try to incorporate that into your daily experience. And then when it comes to just daily stress, using mind body exercises to build that resilience that we talked about. So it's not about always being, in this rest and digest state. There's a lot of times when that stress is good. You've got a project at work that you've got to finish, and that stress is going to get you to get there and get you to finish and get you to show up, and it'll, even enhance your cognitive functions at times when you're really needing to get in the zone. But your body can't live there, and it can't exist there all the time. So incorporating these exercises, whatever it might be for you, maybe it's a yoga session that you do on your lunch break. Maybe it's going for a walk on your lunch break, spending time in nature, a quick meditation in the morning, doing some gratitude journaling, waking up and writing down 3 or 5 things that you're grateful for every morning. Doesn't have to be huge practices, but what's key about them in the beginning is just getting to notice the state of your body and tune into the state of your body. And this is really important when it comes to things like the elimination diet and realizing the effects that foods are having actually on your body. Is this ability to actually be in your body. A lot of the time we exist up here, right? We're very cognitive. We're very much so, doing and seeing and being. And so sometimes it's hard to kind of come down into the body and to settle in and go, okay, what am I actually feeling? So when you're doing these practices, notice how you feel after a 20-minute yoga session. Take note of your breathing, the pace of your thoughts, how it feels in your body, or after a meditation or after a walk in nature. Maybe you already know how that feels. And then being able to tune in and, for example, around mealtime, check in when you're doing your 3 deep breaths. Take note of your thoughts. Are they still rapidly pacing? You're still making this to-do list. You still have this thing on your mind that you have to finish up. Is your, body kind of in this tense state, or your shoulders hiked up and your jaws really tight? Take notice of those feelings so that you can know, okay, right now I'm kind of in this fight or flight state. Okay, I can feel that. What can I do to shift? And just incorporating that into your life in a way that that's meaningful for you. And this last little point here around mindset challenge. So this is so important and so interesting, is that even something as simple as a negative thought about yourself or a situation can trigger that fight or flight. So it doesn't have to be something big like, a tiger in front of you that's going to cause that physiological shift to happen to get you ready to fight that tiger or run away. It can be something as simple as a negative thought about yourself. Like, wow, that's crazy. So if you're chronically stuck in this state of talking down on yourself, of saying, oh, that wasn't good enough, you're not good enough, or whatever it might be, start to identify that. Start to listen to those thoughts and start to rework and repattern those. And it's an interesting time to talk about that when we're also talking about brain health and neuroplasticity. Our brains are constantly creating these neural pathways, and they're kind of our go-to pathway, right? So we have these things that we've kind of built up over our lifetime of, this is my natural reaction to something. So maybe something goes wrong at work and your natural reaction is to fire these neurons that say, oh, you're worthless. Of course you would get that wrong. You don't deserve this job, or whatever it is. But being able to identify that thought as the first piece and then rework it, offer an alternative. Oh, that was a really hard day at work today. I made a mistake, but you know what? I learned from it. And moving forward, next time that comes up, I'm going to be even more prepared and I'm going to be ready for it. Offering something like that simple alternative is beginning to work with that neuroplasticity and beginning to create these new neural patterns that you'll start to fall into more and more often the more and more you exercise them. So taking a look at that mindset, the way that that's affecting your fight or flight in your body, and to really hone this back into what we began talking about, the effect that stress is having on your inflammation in your body and how that's affecting the brain. Next step. So we talked about some kind of takeaways just from this evening, things that you can implement right away. Eating half a plate of veggies at each meal, being mindful of your consumption of more of these sad diet items, being mindful around those, inflammatory foods, and taking a look at stress in your life and incorporating some of that mindful eating. A really great next step, if the things that we've been talking about have really been landing and you're ready to kind of go deeper into this work, I offer a program. It's a one-on-one program. I just call it the Whole Health Program because it addresses all aspects of health. It's primarily looking at nutrition, but then we pull in some other aspects as well. So the program supports cognitive functioning, mood, disease prevention, and this is coming at it from a brain health perspective because that's what we've been talking about. But this can also be looked at just as kind of a great program to set you up for great health, whether it's, brain fog, body pain, migraines, fatigue is a big one that people experience and can have a really good turnaround with this program. And especially, of course, digestive complaints. So if you're having a lot of gas, bloating, indigestion, cramping, this is a great place to kind of come to address that and get to the bottom of what's going on. So in it, we go through the full elimination protocol, like we have talked a little bit about tonight, with complete support. So we, first of all, go through the ins and outs of it. I support you with recipes and meal plans. We look at your specific situation. So it's not like, okay, here's all this stuff, go ahead and do it. We look at your life. Okay, how are we going to make this work in your life? Because if it's not something that's going to just fit right in, then we need to look at, okay, where's there time for meal prep? How do we look at meal planning? And that conversation changes from person to person depending on the support that the individual needs. The other really cool thing about this program is that we do a couple of pieces of testing that give us some really good baselines and some really good information to work with beyond the actual elimination protocol, beyond the nutrition piece. And that's running the BIA and the Biowell testing. And that gives us some whole body support. So the BIA analysis gives us some really good information about the actual composition of the body, tells us about the hydration of the cells and the cellular communication between those cells. And it's a great baseline marker for us to go off of and see how things change as the program goes on. And the Biowell testing I'll get into in a little bit, but it really looks at the energetic body and gives us a really great place to jump off some conversations around that stress piece and around seeing where there's excess energy in the body, maybe depletions of energy, and how we can work with that to really balance the whole person. So the 8-week program, it's 8 weeks, takes you from the elimination phase to the reintroduction phase, and then into long-term maintenance. And just really briefly and quickly, we'll go over what the program looks like. So week 1, we do a 90-minute intake. This is where we go over your health history, goals, dive into your specific story. We run the BIA and the Biowell testing, go over that elimination protocol, really get you supported and feeling like you're ready to take that on. Then we get to go over the Biowell testing and look at those specific areas of stress and energy imbalance in the body. You'll get some takeaway homework, maybe some journaling prompts, maybe some breath work or movement exercises, something that sits with you and feels like it's something really supportive. And of course, there's email support during the whole 8 weeks. In week 4, we come back together, we go over reintroduction, we rerun our testing, take a look at our baseline and see things that have shifted, go over that Biowell report again, reviewing progress, symptomology, and we talk about then at this point reintroduction and set up your reintroduction schedule. At week 8, we come back together for a third meeting. Here we run those tests again, kind of comparing, going over things that have changed, looking at symptomology. We look at your reintroduction results, and we get you set up for that long-term maintenance and maintaining that success. So carrying what you've done forward. So rather than it being, a particular diet, it's kind of changing the relationship with food and your body and finding a way that it's going to continue on to work for you. The last thing I want to share here is this is what the Biowell device generates for us. And it's a device, just really quickly and briefly, that is reading the energy on the body and giving us information on energy imbalances in specific organs, or for example, in this image generated here, relating it to the energy centers of the body. And if you're familiar with chakras or energy centers, this is a really great place for us to look at places of stress in your life. So when these energy centers are out of balance, each one kind of has different meanings, and the more energy that there is in a certain area, the bigger the energy field there is being represented. So it gives us a really good place for communication around stressors, around areas to work with. And like I said, this is where things like journal prompts come up, taking a look at specific ideas and contemplating things around each one of these energy centers can be really, really beneficial when it comes to the stress piece and when it comes to kind of integrating the whole body, the energetic body as well, into this healing process. Another thing that's generated is just shown here, and this is something called a biorhythm, and it represents different times throughout the month that your you're going to have highs and lows and energies, and this is represented for each individual, showing physical highs, emotional highs, intellectual highs and lows. And it's a really good thing for mindfully planning your month. If you know you have something intellectual going on, you can kind of plan it around when you're going to have an intellectual high and that type of thing. And that's something that's generated by that report. Also gives us a glimpse into the state of stress in the body, your energy levels, balances between your autonomic nervous system, and really gives us a whole idea of your stress level. So that was a lot to kind of end it on there with the GDV, with the Biowell device. It's a really interesting tool and something that I'm really enjoying incorporating into my client sessions. So if that sounded like something that really resonated with you and something that you want to dive into, the program itself for the 8 weeks and all of the support that comes along with it is normally $400. But I want to offer a discount for participating tonight and really showing that you are invested and interested in your health and your well-being. So I wanted to offer a $50 discount to anyone who wanted to reach out to me from this presentation. And the way to do that would be contacting me at this email here, annemarie@embodywellness.ca. I have a couple of spots left for beginning in April and a few more in May. So if this is something that is calling to you that you're interested in, please let me know. We'll connect. We can do a quick call to kind of go over the fit for you for the program, or you can dive right in. Just reach out, let me know you're interested, and we can go from there. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for listening, for participating, and I hope you have a really wonderful rest of your evening.